Ram Rao, senior teachers, though they have not taught me formally in National College, I do know him, many of them. Maybe their son, maybe some of them, their children were our students in Central College. It's indeed a pleasure, as always, to come to the National College, my alma mater, to give a talk here, to interact with, though not all teachers, but at least some of them I do meet here. And I really feel very happy and proud to have been a product of National College. And many a time when I've traveled abroad or maybe to universities within the country, I do meet old students of this college, and it gives us a great pleasure to recollect the fine days that we all spent in the National College, Baswangudi. So with this, I'll straight away move on to my talk. I was asked to give a talk on something perhaps which is quite popular. That is one thing, because it's the Bangalore Science Forum. People of all background do attend this particular lectures. So then I kept thinking as to what should be done. Finally I decided that it should be something on applications of mathematics and the immense opportunities that these applications throw open to anyone who loves mathematics, that is. So I just thought about this. I have planned my presentation like this. I'm going to give you an overview of mathematical modeling, not very technical. It's not technical, of course. I'm going to talk about the omnipresence of mathematics with a few examples. And finally, I'm going to wind up with a brief talk on what are the opportunities that are available if one has a background of mathematics, that is. I'm not going to talk in very technical terms so far as opportunities are concerned. I'm just going to make it a very general talk where at the end of it, you can yourself decide what are the opportunities that are going to be there. So let me do an overview of mathematical modeling. Oh, I'm sorry about the color. I'll just read out this. The essence of mathematical modeling is not to make simple things complicated, but to make complicated things simple, that is. So that is the essence of mathematical modeling. It is a representation in mathematical terms of certain aspects. I have underlined the phrase certain aspects of a non-mathematical system. Now, let us slowly get into this with the help of a few examples. Now, what is it that we do in mathematical modeling? We have a transformations of the laws of physics. It could be physics, it could be chemistry, biology, engineering. And we translate that or transform that into the laws of, transform that in terms of mathematical expressions. When we say mathematical expressions, it could be anything. When we say mathematical model, it does not necessarily mean differential equations, as many people think. It can be any mathematical equation, that is. It could be an algebraic equation, transcendental equation, it could be a differential equation or an integral equation or any mathematical expression. You can call that as a model. So basically, modeling involves mathematics plus some discipline, some other discipline like physics, chemistry or biology or whatever. So we start with assumptions. Now suppose we are modeling some particular physical system. We start with some assumptions, express those assumptions in terms of, in this particular example, I have chosen differential equations as the mathematical model. And once I do that, I have a mathematical formulation. If that mathematical model has to be useful, I'll have to solve that and interpret in terms of certain gross features which I know about the system. So I solve the differential equation, obtain the solutions. I have some model predictions. That means I know some gross features about that particular system. So I compare the results which I obtain, which I get from the solution of the differential equation. I compare that. If the model predictions match with the known facts, it means my modeling is fine. The mathematical model is correct. Then always, as always, when we talk about mathematical modeling being correct, sometimes we'll have to quantify it. For example, the results between the known results between the model predictions and what we have predicted by the model, it will have to match up to a certain degree, that is, okay, we call accuracy. So possibly we also do that. So if that is fine, we say that the assumptions are fine. If the matching is not, if the matching is imperfect, whatever, then we again go back to the assumptions, change the assumptions. That means we have a new model now. Again solve that and see whether we get the correct solution. Many a time, the mathematical modeling exercise really depends on the person who is modeling. It depends on his skill set. Now suppose he is very well versed in only linear differential equations. He cannot have a mathematical model that is a non-linear differential equation. Suppose he is not comfortable with programming. So obviously he cannot have a very complicated differential equation with complicated boundary conditions perhaps, and he is unable to solve it because he does not have the necessary training. He does not know programming. Maybe he will not be able to do it. Similarly with numerical methods. So it really depends on that. Now why mathematical modeling? Now let us see this. What are the methods of prediction? One is the experimental investigation, the other is the theoretical calculation. Let us take the case of the wind tunnel. Now suppose we are designing an aeroplane. Can we afford to design as many aeroplanes as we want, fly it and then decide this is going to be the best design? Obviously we cannot do that. We'll have to do some tests in the wind tunnel. That means have scaled down models of the actual model and try it out in the wind tunnel, and after we are convinced that the model is fine, we may be able to really come up with the best model. So that sort of thing is also there. So experimental investigation is definitely required, but in the scales like for example the wind tunnel or the water tunnel, the experiments can be really expensive. It can be prohibitive, that is. So in that case, the theoretical investigations come quite handy, that is. So they are not a replacement for experimental investigations. Theoretical investigations are not a replacement for experimental investigations, but they definitely support experimental investigations. So experimental investigations many a time come after theoretical investigations, or we have an experimental investigation, then we decide, okay, this is going to be the mathematical model, so then do the theoretical investigation, maybe a series of simulations, and finally come up with the best experiment that can be done for that particular process. Now it gives experimental investigation no doubt gives most reliable information, but full-scale experiments are highly expensive and sometimes even impossible, that is. Alternate is to perform small-scale models which do not simulate all features of the full-scale experiment. But nevertheless, they do give you some idea about the gross features. In the case of theoretical calculation, it works out the consequences of a mathematical model rather than those of an actual physical model. Using classical mathematics, only tiny fraction of physical phenomena can be predicted. So we should know about this as well. Fortunately, the development of numerical method and the availability of digital computers holds the promise that mathematical modeling for any practical problem can be solved. Mathematical model for any practical problem can be solved. it is low cost, theoretical investigation is low cost compared to the experimental investigation. Information is definitely complete, and we are able to simulate ideal that is conditions. If the prediction has a very limited objective, then computation may not be less expensive than an experiment. That is also there. Problems for which adequate mathematical description has not yet been worked out. There are problems. If you have not worked out fully what the mathematical description is, suppose we are unable to model that, then also there is going to be a problem with that. So now what I'll do is, I know that there is going to be a talk on the golden ratio, but let me quickly go through this. I also use similar examples from nature and from other situations. So I would like to call it as math in action. So suppose I did not write it properly, it would become math in action. Okay, so we have to be careful. When I presented this talk in one of the colleges, unfortunately, that is what happened. So let's see the patterns in nature. Now this is Fibonacci for you. Now you see the patterns in nature. Now for example, you take the zebra, that is. You also take the that is bee nest, that is. You take the spider web. You take the coiled this thing. You see the galaxy. You see that is cyclone. You see the head of an individual. There are a lot of similarities. Okay. Now similarly, you take the case of the tortoise and a number of other things. You see a number of patterns very similar to each other. Okay. Not same, very similar to each other. So we can see all these patterns in nature, that is. Now these are classical examples which have been very frequently used by mathematicians to talk about, for example, fractals. This is a very frequent example which is chosen. Similarly, the others. So let us see now. Let us approach this particular pattern. So Fibonacci sequence. Am I getting around to it? Now Fibonacci sequence, as you know, begins with the number 0 and 1. The subsequent pattern that follows is, for example, you take this. 1 is the sum of the two consecutive preceding numbers, that is. If you take 2, it is 1 plus 1. 1 plus 2, that gives you 3, 2 plus 3, that is 5, and so on. So that's how we get the Fibonacci. That's, maybe you know this, but I'm just doing it for completeness. Now if you take the case of the pineapples, in the case of the pineapples, you will see that the pineapples grow in a particular numerical sequence that follows the Fibonacci sequence. So you see that there are 8 parallel rows, then 13 spiral rows, then 21 parallel rows, and so on. So beyond the 8, it is definitely the Fibonacci sequence, that is. So you have this Fibonacci sequence in this particular fashion. It keeps on growing. Now, what happens is, when we get passionate about something, for example, now I am engrossed in studying Fibonacci sequence, I try to see Fibonacci sequence in everything that I do. Now, for example, over here, what is it that you have? It is the Pascal's triangle. So you take this. So a plus b to the power of 1. This is a plus b to the power of 0. So the coefficient of a plus b to the power of 1 is a plus b, that is 1 and 1. Suppose I take a plus b whole squared. It is a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. So the coefficients of the binomial expansion you can see over here. So you can actually arrange all this in a particular way, that is. So you have 1 throughout, left and right. So 1 plus 1 is 2. Now suppose I have 1, 2, 1. What happens? I retain 1. 1 plus 2 is 3. 2 plus 1 is 3, 1 is retained as it is. If I keep doing that, so I get the Pascal's triangle. Now this is the usual Pascal triangle which we use for binomial expansion. But suppose I am so passionate about Fibonacci sequence, then I start seeing the Fibonacci sequence even in the Pascal's triangle. So let us see this. Now you see here, it is 1, then 1, then you have 1 and 1 in the Pascal's triangle itself. So you see, if you just move from the bottom to the top, it is essentially Fibonacci sequence. So you can see such patterns like that. In the case of the sunflower seeds also, the two spirals going in opposite directions. One can also see the Fibonacci sequence in the form of a spiral, that is. If you take the case of the pine cone, it is an inverted Fibonacci sequence. So you have the pine cone is smaller at the top and becomes increasingly wider near the bottom. This is one other example. So that spiral which we saw, actually in the earlier example when Fibonacci was shown, I think the spiral should have spiraled out, meaning that it is increasing. So here it is correctly shown, that is. So you will see that the ratios in which these shells grow, so you will see that in the form of a Fibonacci sequence, that is Fibonacci spiral. So once you start seeing a Fibonacci sequence in everything, possibly even seeing a girl bathing in a river, the hair that goes back, you will feel that it is a Fibonacci sequence, that is, or Fibonacci spiral. So that will be the type of thing which, that is the type of thing which someone saw and he has posted that on the web, that is. So that makes interesting reading. Now you take the fingers, that is. So if this is 2 units, that is 3, that is 5, that is 8 and so on. So that is again in the form of the Fibonacci sequence. Even for example, this Leonardo Vinci's painting, they were done as per a particular proportion, that is, and they followed the Fibonacci sequence. Now let us take the case of the chameleon's tail, that also follows the Fibonacci sequence. So you see the spiral over there. Again, this famous painting, that also in ratio and proportion, many things follow the Fibonacci sequence. I am not going into the details of that, but I will just end up this by just telling to you that this particular, this particular thing is a sequence of LED lights which has been designed, and apparently it has been shown by them that if the bulbs are arranged in a particular fashion which follow the Fibonacci sequence, the light is optimum, that is. Okay, so this is something which is amazing. I really don't know how, I could not really figure it out as to how Fibonacci sequence comes in this particular example. But possibly we will have to get some more information, but I am not very sure about what he was saying. But this is available on the net. So now let me talk about yet another example. If suppose we try to model lakes, for example, we are able to do it mathematically, though in a limited way, that is. So let us take this. Suppose I think of modeling a lake in Bangalore. So I will take the simplest situation. I will take, for example, nutrients, phytoplankton, zooplankton. When I say phytoplankton, they are microscopic plants. When I say zooplankton, they are microscopic animals, that is. Now plankton is itself plural, like furniture. So you have phytoplankton and zooplankton. Now all these are present in lakes along with the fishes. So it's all part of the food chain. Now suppose I want to model this, I take away the fishes for simplicity, that is. See, I know fully well that the fishes are there, but for simplicity, in order to illustrate to you how mathematics can come handy in these modeling exercises, I will just take the nutrients. When you say nutrients, it can be nitrates or phosphates, it could be dead matter, it could be releases from industry, that is. So many things, they all go by the name of nutrients. What we call as waste is perhaps useful for the lake, for the survival of the living beings in the lake, that is. So let us take a simple example wherein we have nutrients. I just take one nutrient, that is one phytoplankton and two zooplankton. So this is what you have. So I have told all this. So you see the different sources for the nutrients, and so they can come from various things. It can be from discharge, it can be nitrates and phosphates, runoff from industry, for example. It could be manure, it could be from streets, that is, it could be from erosion, or dissolved nitrogen oxides, or many of these things, or discharge of untreated municipal sewage, that is. They all go by the name of ecosystem nutrients, that is. The same thing. Now phytoplankton, as I said, they are microscopic plants or algae. You cannot see them through the eye. But what is very important is, like the usual plants, macroscopic plants, they produce oxygen, they absorb and recycle elements such as carbon and sulfur, and convert minerals to a form used by animals. So they are very useful to the animals which are present in the lake, that is the zooplankton. So it is the primary food source of all water organisms. So as I told you, they are microscopic in nature, they are not visible to the naked eye. Similarly, the zooplankton, they are microscopic, but what is important is, the phytoplankton don't eat the zooplankton. Okay, obvious. But the zooplankton, they eat the phytoplankton, that is. And they are tiny animals, they are single-celled protozoans, and they are relatively larger than their phytoplankton counterparts. But what is important is, the zooplankton eat the phytoplankton, and the other way is not true. So here the nutrients, let me just summarize this. The nutrients are eaten by the phytoplankton. The phytoplankton are consumed by the zooplankton. The zooplankton are consumed by smaller fishes. The smaller fishes are consumed by the bigger fishes. And this goes on. So this is the entire food web. The phytoplankton, which is a small microscopic plant, so that takes everything from the sun. Okay, so all that the macroscopic plant does, the phytoplankton does. So let us take this. So I am taking a nutrient, a phytoplankton, two zooplanktons, and I will not discuss that. I will just move on. Yes. What I will do is, I will assume, in my mathematical model, I will assume N to be a nutrient. It can be a phosphate or a nitrate or a dead matter or anything, for example. I will just take one representative concentration. So I will take two phytoplankton and two zooplankton. As I said, the zooplankton may eat the phytoplankton. So it can be carnivorous or it can be herbivore. So that is also there. Now in order that this particular model is useful, I should have some initial information about the lake. So I should know how much of nutrient is available in that lake. But now imagine I have a huge lake. I want to model that. The lake is irregular in shape. The topography is irregular. Everything about it is irregular. The concentrations are different at different points. So if I want to do that, it is simply impossible. I cannot model the lake as it is. So at best what I can do is, I can make a mathematical model of a representative lake. So now I'll have to do that. So if I want to do that, what I do is, I find out the total amount of nutrients available in a liter, that is. So first I find out the amount of nutrient available in a liter. Suppose it is 1.5 mg. Then I multiply it by the total area, that will give me the initial condition, that will give me the initial concentration in the entire lake. That is again an estimation. Now how do I arrive at this? Now this 1.5 can be arrived at if I take a number of samples and then decide that it is 1.5 mg. It's not just at one particular point. I choose the sample from many different points in the lake and arrive at statistical average sort of thing, so which is 1.5 mg. Likewise, if I want my mathematical model to be useful, to be practical, I need to know how much amount of phytoplankton is there, P1. So, for example, say it is 15 milligram per meter. Okay, so that will give me the initial amount of phytoplankton present in the lake. Similarly, the phytoplankton P2. Similarly, I talked about the zooplankton 1, say 30 milligram per meter. Similarly, zooplankton 2, 20 milligram per meter. So once I know this, now let me see how this represents the mathematical model of the lake. Okay? If you take, for example, this differential equation without these terms, the second, third and fourth, let me omit that for the time being. So what is it that I have? I have the source of nutrients, which I call as Sn, and I have M1M. Now you have a first order equation here. You have a source here. That means you have a continuous supply of nutrients. And what should happen? In the absence of phytoplankton P1 and P2, in the absence of any diffusion of the nutrient, what should happen to the nutrient? Because of the source, it should increase exponentially. So that is what happens. In the absence of phytoplankton P1 and P2, and in the absence of any diffusion of nutrient, the nutrient increases in that particular lake. But the balance is struck because of the phytoplankton which are present. For example, now let us take this. If phytoplankton P1 is present, what should happen to the nutrient? The phytoplankton consumes the nutrient. So, the more and more of phytoplankton present, there will be a decrease in the nutrient. So, this negative sign is because of that. Similarly, due to phytoplankton P2, more and more of phytoplankton P2, the less and less of concentration of the nutrient. So, therefore, you have a negative sign. Now, this is diffusion. That means the nutrient concentration, wherever it is high, it moves from higher concentration to lower concentration. That is, if it is nitrate or phosphate, it just diffuses from higher concentration to lower concentration. So I know the initial nutrient concentration, so this is what I have. Now, let me take this. In the absence of nutrient, suppose I assume that this is not there. So what should happen to the phytoplankton? Because the nutrient is not there, the phytoplankton population must come down. So you have a minus sign there. So it decreases exponentially. So you see that phytoplankton decreases exponentially in the absence of nutrient. Similarly over here, in the absence of nutrient, phytoplankton P2 decreases exponentially with time. Let us take these two equations. You take the case of phytoplankton. Now for example, if phytoplankton 1 and phytoplankton 2 are present, what have we said? The zooplankton, they are definitely herbivore, they eat away the phytoplankton, they might eat the other zooplankton as well. So, we are assuming here that this zooplankton Z1 is consuming the phytoplankton P1 and phytoplankton P2, that is, and if the number of phytoplanktons and P1 and P2 are more, then the Z1 increases, that is number of zooplankton increases. However, if zooplankton 2 is present in abundance in the system, zooplankton 2 is carnivorous, that means it eats away the zooplankton Z1. So what should happen? The more the number of zooplankton Z2, the less will be the number of zooplankton Z1. So therefore I have a minus sign. Let me again interpret this. The more and more of phytoplankton P1 and P2, the more of Z2, so you have a plus sign. If there are no phytoplanktons, then the population of the zooplankton will just come down exponentially, that is. We have all the initial data regarding the nutrient, the phytoplankton and the zooplankton. This is a very simple model for a lake. Now we can slowly bring into this model the flow of the lake. For example, there may be runoff during the rainy season. During this season there will be runoff. So we can bring into the model. You can also have the fishes coming into the model. Separate modeling for the small fishes, separate model for the big fishes. So one can have a model like this. So it means that if we are equipped, if you take these examples, I mean, for those of you who are not familiar with differential equations, you need not bother. But for those of you who are familiar, I would say that these differential equations are not very difficult to solve. With minimum idea about differential equations, you will definitely be able to solve this and interpret that. But what is important is, see, mathematicians many a time come up with equations. But what about the you just see, I'm sorry, you just see the equations here. You take M1, you do not know at what rate the nutrient is increasing due to the source Sn. So that has to be determined. Similarly M2, M3, M1, M2, alpha 1, alpha 2, all these are undetermined. So when we want this mathematical model to be useful, we must have specific data. We must have correct data. There must be an estimation of all these coefficients, that is. So for that, you would require samples to be taken from the lake. We might say, take a few, take a sample, separate out the phytoplankton, separate out the zooplankton. It is not as simple as we say. I had a lengthy discussion with the zoology department. They said developing a culture for the phytoplankton and zooplankton, it is really very, very difficult because they are microscopic in nature. So the measurements can be really hard. But assuming that it can, it can be done. So knowing that it can be done, what can be done is, we can have several aquariums like this, and we can find out the rate at which the phytoplanktons are growing or decaying, or the rate at which the zooplanktons are growing and decaying. We would require 14 such aquariums to find out the various constants. So once these constants are found out, then this mathematical model will be useful. All this. One other very important thing is, this mathematical model which has been developed is applicable only for one season. So if we want the mathematical model for yet another season, that modeling exercise has to be done all over again. So this modeling is specific for summer, for example. Suppose it is a rainy season, we will have to change this particular model. So that is something which we have to say. So we have to do the experiment along with the zoology department, have 14 types of these aquariums, and we have to do the experiments to have continuous observation for 120 days. That is one season, that is. Now let me take another example of artificial rain. So let us see how mathematics can be useful. What is unusual about this particular picture? Yes. It is a Saudi Arabian country, but a man carrying an umbrella. Okay? But this is a fact. It is raining in Saudi Arabia. Okay? Because they have implemented the artificial rain. So this is a reality. Now let us take, before we come to the mathematical modeling of the artificial rain, let us come, I am sorry for this, but I will explain anyway. Let us speak about atmospheric heating and circulation. If you take the Earth, there is an envelope of air which is called as the atmosphere. So you have the sun. The radiation of the sun does not heat the atmosphere. It is the back radiation, because the absorption of the electromagnetic radiation happens only at a particular wavelength. So it is the back radiation from the Earth which contributes to the heating of the atmosphere. So you have direct radiation which does not heat the atmosphere. You have the back radiation which heats the atmosphere. So heating takes place due to back radiation. So that means the temperature on the surface of the Earth is more compared to the upper levels of the atmosphere. So temperature decreases with height. So this is one thing let us observe. Now, if this is the equator, that is, the temperature is maximum at the equator. So the temperature being maximum, what should happen to the envelope of air? It gains energy, so it moves up. But the amount of energy that the air gains is enough to take it only up to 30 degrees. So it goes up to 30 degrees. So the air over here, it moves up and falls down, moves up, falls down. Now, the temperature at 30 degrees north and 60 degrees north, again at 30 degrees north, the temperature is more than 60 degrees north. But the circulation of air does not happen like this. For example, at 30 degrees, the air is not moving up and falling down at 60 degrees. Because the energy that the air particle gains at 30 degrees is not enough to overcome the force of this cell, which is called as the Hadley cell, from the equator to 30 degrees north. So this circulation, the Hadley cell circulation, is the dominant one. So it circulates the cell in the clockwise direction. So you have here you have anti-clockwise circulation, here you have clockwise, here you have anti-clockwise again. So it's a series of counter-rotating circulating patterns. So what we call as wind is the horizontal component of these circulating patterns. So wind is horizontal portion of these circulating cells. Now when it comes to rain, what is the cause for rain? The water on the surface of the earth is evaporated, it becomes water vapor, and it moves to the upper level. Because it becomes lighter, it moves to the upper levels, and at the upper levels it needs cooler layer of air. Because how is the temperature in the atmosphere? It decreases with height. So you see cooler layers of air. So due to the cooling, they condense and you have small water droplets, that is. But those droplets are not good enough to have rain. Only when they all come together and form a cloud will they be able to give rise to rain. So for them to come together, there should be what is called as cloud seeding. That seeding is done through aerosols which are present in the atmosphere. What are those aerosols? The aerosols could be dust, they could be soot, or they could be salt crystals. Artificially, when it is done, the aerosols can be silver iodide and acetone, for example. There are other seeding mechanisms also, but why are these needed? Why are these aerosols important? These aerosols are important because they help in the water particles coming together and forming clouds, that is. So once these aerosols absorb the heat from those particles and bring them together into bigger, of a bigger magnitude, we have clouds, and that condensation gives rise to what is called as rain. So though we see clouds in the sky, many a time will not have rains. What is the reason? The water particles do not come together. And once they lose, once they become heavy due to gravity, they just move down. So all these things will have to be artificially managed in the case of the artificial rain. So when does it rain? It rains only when larger clouds are formed. When you have high cloud density, when does it normally rain? You see a streak of clouds and that is when it is going to rain. So you have a cooling effect when the water vapor gets converted into water droplets, and further the heat is extracted from them, and that leads to raining. That is. So these are all mechanisms by which the raining is actually affected. So they are done in several stages. I will discuss that a little later. If you want, I will leave these slides for you. I have collected it. There have been a number of experiments. For example, in Thailand, they are frequently used. They use it and they call it as king's rain. And they try to get, it's not that they have always been successful, but they have definitely been successful many a time. So similarly in Germany, contrary to what they have done in Thailand and other places, in Germany, they use these things to subdue potential rainfall. This is the opposite of the rain, that is artificial rain. So there is the agitation stage, building up stage, bombardment stage, and so on, all the steps which I mentioned earlier. So you can classify that. Now how do you go about having artificial rain? In the case of natural rain, we know that all the water particles come together. They become heavy and finally we have rain, that is. So how do you actually give rise to this cloud seeding? So we do that through artificial means. So rain-making chemicals are fired into the clouds. So the firing can be from the ground or it can be from the aeroplane itself. Those chemicals, they play the part played by, for example, the dust or the soot or the salt crystals. These are some. Now this is normally done at 18,000 meters, the normal flying height, that is. Now let us get into the task of modeling this. Now suppose I want to model this. What I will do is, I will assume for simplicity that there are two aerosols. When I say aerosol, it can be dust or soot, or it can be salt crystal, or it can be any of the artificial chemicals that we are putting in the upper levels of the atmosphere. So we assume there are two aerosol particles and they serve the purpose of cloud seeding, that is, and give rise to formation of clouds. We assume that there is a lot of water vapor in the atmosphere. It's a humid atmosphere, and water vapor phase is naturally formed in the atmosphere but is not condensed enough. That is the reason why we don't have rain. We do have small clouds, but we do not have rain. So that is the situation. The formation of cloud droplets from vapor cloud is initiated by introducing one kind of aerosol, but the transformation of raindrop subsequently takes place with interaction of another type of aerosol. So each aerosol we assume has a specific purpose in this particular model. So let me assume that the density of water vapor is rho v, the density of cloud droplets is rho d, the density of raindrops is rho r. Rho is the density here. So C1 and C2 are the concentrations of the two aerosols, two types of aerosols. QV is the rate of continuous formation of water vapor. It is the source of water vapor, for example. Similarly, rate of continuous introduction of aerosol 1, rate of continuous introduction of aerosol 2. We are introducing the aerosol from outside. They are artificial aerosols, but the rate of continuous formation of water vapor has already happened. We are only trying to manipulate the weather, that is. So suppose I want to have a mathematical model for artificial rain. So what is it that I can do? So you take rho v, what is that? That is the density of water vapor. The density of water vapor in the absence of C1. What is C1? C1 is the concentration of the aerosol 1. Suppose there is no aerosol, then it does not manipulate on the density of the water vapor. Only when the water, the aerosol is there, will it manipulate on the density of the water vapor. So if this is not there, if the concentration of the aerosol 1 is not there, it will not affect that. So we have a source of water vapor, but it is a fixed amount. Now suppose there is no concentration of aerosol, what will happen to the density of water vapor? It decreases. So that decreases exponentially then. Similarly over here, the density of the droplets, it decreases. But due to the aerosol concentration, C2, the density further decreases. Density of the, that is, droplets. But due to C1, the density of the droplets is increased, because that is, we are very clear what is the role of C1. The role of the aerosol 1 is to increase the density of the droplets. What is the role of C2? It is to decrease the density of the droplets. So the roles have been segregated. So that is the reason why we have this. Similarly, we can interpret the density of the other density that we have taken, that is raindrops. So C1 is the concentration. There are sources Q1 and Q2 decreases in the absence of, for example, in the absence of a source, it just decreases. But rho V and rho D, they influence C1 and C2 as I indicated in the context of these. So this is so far as the mathematical modeling is concerned. This can be useful only if you are able to solve. By solving a simple model like this, we can very clearly say that this is the amount of aerosol concentration that is required in order to have this much amount of rain. This is a very simple model, it's a very crude model. But this needs sophistication in case it has to be made more useful. There are a number of sophisticated models available in the case of artificial rain. This is one of the simplest models that I took to explain this status. Now this has been rain-making exercise have been going on in China, North America. They also have a weather modification association, then cloud seeding program, a number of things. The weather modification operations and research board, these things are in vogue in countries abroad. China very successfully made use of artificial rains. Okay, so what they did was, if the weather prediction said that there is going to be rain the next day, they preponed the rain to the previous day so that they would have sunshine on the next day. They succeeded to the tune of 60%. So that is quite a good percentage of success. They were able to do that. So there are a number of references here. So now let us take the other applications that one can have of mathematics, both natural as well as human-made, man-made. You can have applications of mathematics in physiological flows, geophysical applications, crystal growth and so on. Okay, others are man-made. For example, peristalsis flow. We are able to handle mathematically the peristalsis flow within the body. Peristalsis flow you see at various places. Even the intestine, for example, it is peristalsis flow. So number of places it is peristalsis flow. To a limited extent, we are able to handle it mathematically, that is. So that is the state of art, so far as the physiological system is concerned. Large circulating currents are present within the Earth's mantle. There is a lot of similarity between this particular circulation that we see and what we see in the case of the ocean, for example, or what we see in the case of cloud formation. Even cloud formation can be interpreted in terms of the mathematical, the mathematical model for mantle convection, which we see over here, which is a huge circulating cell. The mathematical model for this is very similar to that of cloud formation as well as that of a geothermal reservoir. So here I show you the cloud streets. Now why is it that the mathematical model for this is very similar to that of the Earth's mantle? At the middle of the earth, the temperature is enormous. As we move to the surface of the earth, the temperature decreases. So if you observe in the case of the earth's atmosphere, what is it that you observe? From the surface of the earth, the temperature decreases with height. So the mechanism of driving the circulation of the Earth's atmosphere is very similar to the mechanism that drives the circulation in the case of the interior of the Earth, that is the Earth's mantle. So the mechanism is similar, but it is definitely influenced by certain other factors, which are, one factor is the Kelvin-Helmholtz instability. I am not going to details of that. You see this particular lake in Chile. This lake got dried up. There was activity within the lake, at the bottom of the lake, so you see some nice patterns. There was some dynamics inside. And when the lake dried up, you saw some nice patterns. So the mechanism for that is very similar to what we saw in the case of the Earth's mantle and the case of cloud formation, that is. So pattern formations you are seeing. There are a number of other things. For example, you take the case of the chip inside your system. That gets heated up. The cooling of the chip, for example, can be done through circulating air. So the mechanism is very similar. I mean, not very similar, definitely similar to a certain extent. So what you see in, for example, a pressure cooker can be like that, or a teapot. You see circulating patterns. It is hot over here, cool over there. So you see circulating patterns. Similarly, the atmosphere, as we said. Now here is another interesting example. This is an experiment which was done by Korsnider in 1974. He takes a circular container and he put silicon oil in it. He took the bottom of the container. He saw very nice patterns like this. You take the case of a square container. This is again done by Korsnider. He saw a different type of pattern. Similarly, a rectangular container. Now, Taylor did a different set of experiments and saw similar patterns. They are all mathematically equivalent. You take the case of this. What you have over here is an inner cylinder which is stationary. You have an outer cylinder which is hollow. And between the solid cylinder, inner cylinder, and the outer hollow cylinder, you have liquid here. Suppose this is, as I said, we keep this stationary. This outer hollow cylinder is rotated. So what you see between those two cylinders, that is the concentric region, is very nice patterns like this. So what is it that you see over here? You see clockwise circulating cell. On top of that, you have anti-clockwise. Very similar to what you saw in the case of the atmospheric circulation, or in the case of the clouds, that is. So this is hexagonal cells which you see when surface tension effect is present. So suppose you keep the top of the container open, surface tension effect becomes important, the mathematics becomes a little more complicated. You take a box, have liquid and its vapor in it, and vibrate that periodically. Okay, not violently. You vibrate that periodically. You will see patterns very similar to what we saw earlier. So these are, this is what I said. Now let me come to some more mathematics. Electromagnetics, Maxwell's equation, that is. Maxwell's equations, you are able to handle mathematically now. There was a time when only linear Maxwell's equations were able to be handled. The moment we have the properties, that is, for example, the permittivity of the medium depending on the field, the permeability of the magnetic field depending on the magnetic field itself, similarly the conductivity depending on the field, when these things happen, we have, when this is there, we have nonlinear Maxwell's equations. We are able to handle complicated nonlinear models by virtue of the sophistication that we are seeing in the computers as well as the mathematical tools that have been developed to handle these equations. We are able to do that. Now some thoughts on some unusual applications. We can think of a number of things. When I say unusual applications, when I say thoughts, To a certain extent, they are already there. Now, for example, people are already thinking of drawing the best things from, for example, literary art and using it to popularize mathematics. For example, it could be characters from a novel, okay, name them as mathematical objects and try to popularize that. That experiment is already going on. People in the UK have been doing this experiment. There is also experiments on, there are a number of dramas which have been written to popularize mathematics at the primary and high school level, that is. Choreography and mathematics. For example, the solution of differential equations can come in the form of trajectories. If some rhythm is attached to the trajectories, music is attached to that, then it is possible to have choreography through the solution of differential equations. These things are also there. There are musical fountains, for example. Textile design. I talked about some patterns in the nature. And these patterns, for example, if you cut one particular pattern, a smaller portion of that resembles the bigger portion. Mandelbrot sets and many things. So similarly, in the case of textile design, we can make use of these Mandelbrot sets and perhaps design textiles, that is. Then we have Match and Magic. This is a very popular show on TED show. How many of you know TED show? I'll just show you one thing over here. Now let us take some fancy combinations of mathematics. You just try to list out in books on mathematics associated with non-mathematical things. You take this, for example, mathematics for economics and finance. Okay? Here you have stochastic processes. Here you have mathematical applications for management, life and social sciences. You just see the title. Mathematics, mathematical applications for management, life and social sciences. Here you have, of course, natural, artificial neural networks and arts. You have matrices and society. That is the name of the book. So you have fuzzy rule-based modeling. Here you have mathematics of population dynamics, morphogenesis. There are a number of books on mathematicians available which I just wanted to bring to your notice. But what I wanted to emphasize through this lecture is, we might be equipped in our own way to different degrees in mathematics. By virtue of our formal training or by virtue of what we have acquired ourselves. But for each skill set that we possess, I think it is possible to involve ourselves through some mathematical exercise. Some gainful insight can be obtained through that particular effort. And having said this, let me just draw your attention to this particular photograph. What does this photograph show you? You are seeing someone painting the sky. Okay, it appears as though someone is painting the sky. It is the ingenuity of the painter. What he has done is, he has morphed the two paintings and it appears as though he is painting the sky, that is. So, if you show some ingenuity, then people will take notice. If suppose he had just said, he had just shown the sky or he just showed yet another photograph on the canvas, it would not be interesting at all. Here, it appears as though he is using sky as his canvas. So he showed that ingenuity and drew many people towards his photograph. So if you show ingenuity, then you will get noticed. So this is what the photograph conveys. Who is he? He is a typical example of what a teacher should not be. Okay, that is what the movie conveyed. So we should remember that. So I also seek recourse to three idiots. The reason is, when you chase excellence, success will automatically follow. That was the theme of Three Idiots. So there is no need to chase success. What you need to do is, you have to just chase excellence. then success will follow that is. This is the Great Wall of China. I would like you to climb the same. We have climbed to a certain extent. Even after having climbed the Great Wall of China, vertically that is, it is a long way to go horizontally. That is what so whatever modeling exercise or whatever science we say we are practicing, we might climb to a certain extent. Even after having climbed vertically, there is a long way to go horizontally that is. Thank you very much. So that's what I wanted to convey. One should love his mathematics and love the other sciences as well.